Dean Martin, the eternal king of cool, was more than a velvet voice and a charming smile. He was a phenomenon, a living emblem of Hollywood's golden age. To millions, his effortless grace, quick wit, and magnetic presence made him untouchable. Someone who seemed above the struggles of ordinary men. His songs carried the promise that joy could last forever, and his laughter made the world believe he truly belonged among the stars. But even the brightest stars are not immune to the darkness. Behind the mask of cool lived a man scarred by rejection, wounded by heartbreak, and, in the end, broken by the cruelest tragedy a father can endure. Dean's journey began far from glamour. Born Dino Paul Crescetti in 1917 in Steubenville, Ohio, he was the child of Italian immigrants who carried only hope and their native language into America. At school, young Dino's thick accent made him a target. Every mocking laugh, every cutting word reminded him he was different. To protect himself, he turned to humor, softening cruelty with jokes, while secretly finding comfort in music. By 16, he left the classroom for good and stepped into the punishing world of steel mills and boxing rings. Life was hard, but those bruises and scars forged the resilience that would one day define the man. In smoky nightclubs, working as a blackjack dealer, he discovered the power of charm. He studied people as carefully as others studied books, learning that a smile could disarm suspicion and timing could captivate a room. Soon, he found his true gift, his voice. But in the early 1940s, singing in seedy bars as Dino Martini, he was met with indifference and prejudice. Even after changing his name to Dean Martin, humiliation followed. On more than one occasion, audiences greeted his velvet tone with silence so crushing that he later admitted it hurt worse than any punch he had taken in the boxing ring. Fate, however, had other plans. In 1945, in a small New York club, Dean crossed paths with a wiry 19-year-old comic named Jerry Lewis. Their chemistry was instant, their pairing electric. What began as an accident, Jerry interrupting Dean's act with unscripted chaos, turned into magic. Within a year, Martin and Lewis were America's hottest comedy duo, dominating radio, television, and movies. But while the public adored them, Dean quietly suffered. Critics crowned Jerry the genius and dismissed Dean as little more than a handsome straight man. By 1956, exhausted by being overshadowed, Dean ended the partnership. It was a bold move that many thought would end his career. Instead, it unleashed his true power. His performance in The Young Lions in 1958 proved he could hold his own against Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift. Soon after, his song Everybody Loves Somebody soared past the Beatles to #1, and Dean Martin became a legend in his own right. As a member of the Rat Pack alongside Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., he turned Las Vegas into his kingdom. On television, The Dean Martin Show and later the Celebrity Roasts made him a household name. To the world, he was the lovable, carefree entertainer with a drink in hand. Yet, the glass often held apple juice, and behind the mask lived a man who longed for family more than fame. Dean's personal life, however, was riddled with heartbreak. His first marriage to Betty McDonald ended in divorce in 1949, leaving her adrift while Dean raised their 4 children. Later, his second marriage to Jana Beger gave him 3 more children and nearly 25 years of stability. Jeanne was his true partner, the woman who gave him a home and, most importantly, his beloved son, Dean Paul. But the pressures of fame wore them down, and even their strong union dissolved in 1973. A brief third marriage followed, but it too ended in divorce. Though Dean loved his children deeply, he carried guilt over failed marriages, regrets he rarely voiced aloud. Nothing, however, could have prepared him for the tragedy of 1987. His pride and joy, Captain Dean Paul Martin, handsome, talented, and full of promise, died when his fighter jet crashed into the San Bernardino Mountains. The loss destroyed him. Friends and family said Dean was never the same. Even Sinatra admitted that the heartbreak had broken his old friend. The effortless smile, the shrug, the cool detachment. None of it could mask his grief. He withdrew from the spotlight, living quietly, playing golf, and watching westerns, but the joy that once defined him had vanished. By the early 1990s, Dean's health declined. Decades of smoking caught up to him, and doctors diagnosed him with lung cancer. Refusing surgery, he chose peace over prolonging the inevitable. His daughter Deana recalled how he would sit in silence, holding her hand, as she softly sang, "Everybody loves somebody," the song that had once carried him to the top of the charts. These private moments became his final concerts, the love of a daughter returning to a father who had given the world his voice. On Christmas Day in 1995, Dean Martin passed away at 78, surrounded by family. Outside, the world celebrated the holiday, but inside his Beverly Hills home, silence fell as one of the greatest entertainers of all time drew his last breath. Days later, Las Vegas dimmed its neon lights in tribute. For a city that never sleeps, the gesture was monumental, a quiet bow to the man who had given it so much. Dean Martin's life was a tapestry of contradictions. The icon who craved ordinary love, the entertainer who built his charm from pain, the legend who lost his greatest joy to tragedy. Yet even in heartbreak, his grace endured. His legacy lives not only in the songs and films that bear his name, but in the memories of those who knew the man behind the mask, the father, the friend, the dreamer from Steubenville who became the king of cool. And though the final curtain fell long ago, his voice still echoes, timeless and tender. A reminder that everybody truly does love somebody, sometime.